Does the Church ever approve of married couples limiting their family to a few children or to no children at all? We only raise the question because many good people think that the answer to this question is no. The truth is that the answer to the question is very frequently yes, all depending on how the married couple answers to other questions. Why and how? Among the many things Pope Pius XII said on this question, 3 points are particularly appropriate to this discussion. First, that modern married couples face some real difficulties in making decisions about family size. Secondly, that regulation of births can be compatible with God's law. And thirdly, it is up to medical science to make that regulation, when permissible, also possible. We now have more scientific information about the conception of children than ever before in history, and we learn more every day. 50 years ago, the Catholic father or mother, indeed any parent, had only 2 alternatives: have all the babies that resulted from marital acts, or abstain from marital relations indefinitely. The most significant new development has been the realization that the marriage act need not be performed blindly, on the spur of the moment, without any thought of its consequences, and in defiance of the responsibility it might engender. Nor need childbearing now be the mere effect of blind passion. By virtue of new knowledge, the married Christian can and may regulate the relationship between marriage and fertility. And because he can, there is possibility, in my opinion, of more virtue in the 10-child family today, always, of course, presuming the right intention, than in the family of 10 now a half-century old. I say this fully aware of the great saints of old and mindful of their frequent heroism. If the Church restates her old principles in the light of these new situations, she merely wants to make sure that her total mind is fully understood, that having all the babies you can is not necessarily virtuous, and that family limitation as such is not to be condemned. In given circumstances, then, it is quite right and proper for a Catholic married couple to space children, indeed to have no more children, if that be their proper and prudent judgment. Such a decision should present no problem for the informed and conscientious Catholic. What makes the problem for the present-day Roman Catholic? Well, either he enters marriage with the mistaken notion that by having all the babies possible he is doing something that the Church wants, and so sometimes a married couple lacking good spiritual foundation or mutual agreement find themselves overwhelmed, or, being secular-minded, he gives the matter no thought at all, because in the back of his mind contraception is always available should he need it, regardless of what the Church says. In either case, a couple such as this is headed for trouble if it happens to be a pair whose fertility is superabundant or runs into difficulties of economics or health not anticipated during the rosy days of courtship. Our Catholics, too, being a minority in a secular culture, have an additional problem. For many others, morality consists in making up one's own mind to do what seems most beneficial now. And we see so many nice people who think this way and who profit seemingly from being their own God. But for the Catholic, moral behavior involves more than wanting something, even wanting it badly. He must also satisfy the requirement of God's law, the gospel of Christ, and the nature of marriage itself, and in relating means to ends, he is not his own judge and jury. The Church does not want her conscientious children feeling neurotically guilty about not having another baby or about not having a baby next year. While Mother Church loves children, good Catholic parents of fewer children need not be upset over their decision to limit family size. Being religious, they need only be concerned that their motives are pure and that their methods are moral. When, then, may our Catholic couples properly begin to limit their family size? Obviously, when they fulfill the proper conditions, which may be listed as 5. 1. The couple must already have children or be willing to have children during the course of their marriage. Pope Pius XII taught that marriage imposes childbearing as the positive work of the married state itself. Secondly, the decision to limit family size must be mutual. For one party to blackjack the other into agreeing on no more children, or to deny to the other his or her marital rights, would be immoral. 3. The method of avoiding additional pregnancies must not be immoral. Our Christian spouses must exclude from their lives a contraception by either party, whether it be mechanical or chemical, withdrawal, sodomy, sterilization, or abortion. These evil means vitiate the entire moral value of family limitations. Of course, the contraceptionists maintain these are the safe and sure ways, but technical efficiency was never a norm of morality, at least for the Christian. On the other hand, periodic continence, usually misnamed rhythm, is not only an effective way, but a moral way for most married couples to regulate births. But periodic continence involves chastity in marriage. Now, chastity is not very popular in our society. It is equated with sexlessness. But the fact is that chastity, like any human virtue, enables us to do something rightly, and it is important that Christians do things rightly. The virtue of temperance, for example, empowers us to eat and drink what we need to live, and tells us not to consume harmful foods and liquids, and too little. When it comes to regulating our sexual appetites, the virtue of temperance is called chastity. Must married people be chaste? Of course. They must use their sexual powers intelligently and reasonably, as God would wish them to be used, certainly not against His will, to use them in moderation and according to the requirements of their state in life. Chastity, then, makes us master of our passions, not their slaves. It makes us truly human because it accentuates the spirit of man, not his body. The fourth condition for the proper use of rhythm is that the danger of other sexual sins must be remote. And fifthly, the married couple must have a good reason to put any strict limits on either's right to marital intercourse at any particular time. It is imperative, therefore, that each couple evaluate their reasons thoroughly before they make a decision not to have another baby or not to have a baby at this time. And these reasons may be any one of four categories: health, economics, eugenics, for example, where epilepsy runs in the family, or social, for example, the lack of adequate housing. Of course, most important to any discussion of rhythm is the effectiveness of periodic continence as a method of control, and the effectiveness of periodic continence will depend on medical advice. Whenever the conversation gets around to rhythm, one usually encounters a smile or a snort. If not, the candid opinion, well, it just doesn't work. These statements are just not true. All knowledgeable doctors agree that 80% of all women, properly instructed, can determine their fertile and sterile periods with accuracy. The other 20% need special medical attention, which is now more available than ever before. The Christian married couple, therefore, who desire to regulate the size of their families, having first learned to regulate themselves, must then use the medical knowledge that makes rhythm safe for them. And the greatest piece of knowledge that such people need to acquire is the approximate period during each month when they are likely to conceive a child. The medical facts are simple. A woman ovulates once a month and is fertile for only 1 day. Depending on when coitus occurs, conception is possible only during a 5-day period every month, on ovulation day itself, and for 2 days before or after that ovulation day. So the way in which she determines that day is vitally important. For regular women, this is not too difficult to do. Most women know the likely days for the onset of the next cycle. They count back approximately 15 days on an ordinary calendar in their home and mark out the potentially fertile days. But and this is a big but, the calendar method does not work for all women, and all women must realize this fact. In some women, ovulation occurs early or late, so that the cycles are sometimes short or long. Here is where these women must learn to use the right thermometer and must know how to use a chart. At ovulation time, the temperature rises for most women 1 full degree and remains at a high level for the rest of the month. Once the temperature rises and remains risen for 3 days, the woman enters the safest period of the month. Now, all this sounds complicated, but not more so than the continued application of many forms of contraception. However, one thing is clear. The competent direction of an informed and interested medical doctor is vital to the success of Christian family planning, particularly in its early stages. Not only can such a doctor give specific directions in areas already mentioned, but he can instruct a couple in those means of determining ovulation which are not covered in this album. Dr. Robert Odenwald, a noted Washington psychiatrist, in speaking of the problems of family limitation among our Catholic people, said this: "Psychiatrists and doctors have their limitations dealing as they do with personal problems according to their own proper methods. For the human person is interwoven of flesh and spirit, and though they may frequently war against each other, nevertheless they are designed by God for harmony, which is achieved only when the spirit dominates the flesh. And Christians who know that God's grace is given to those who humbly ask for it are always able to do the humanly possible. But here is an area where one does not just hand out rules or do's and don'ts. It is an area where spiritual directors must open up new visions of life for married couples, help them to understand themselves, and put them in the way of the grace of God." The personality of your child is determined in those first hours after coitus by the characteristics of the sperm which first wins the race against its millions of competitors. In that dramatic moment, when the ovum and sperm unite, a new life begins. Although the fused ovum can barely be seen, it contains all the infant's hereditary traits, the traits that determine his blood type, the color of his eyes and skin, the shape of his nose and his jaw, and his intelligence or ability. The infant's sex is determined by the sperm. One type will produce a girl, another a boy. Now growth begins. A growth that will change that single cell into a creature that will emerge after 9 months with trillions of cells, all magnificently combined into a human life. The single cell divides, the newer cells divide, and the newest cells divide. The first indication that conception has occurred is usually failure to menstruate. You should visit your doctor as soon as you believe that you may be pregnant. And after he has determined that you are, then he will list precautions you must observe. He will want you to watch your weight, to exercise regularly, to supplement your diet with vitamins, minerals, perhaps hormones. Most of the pain that American women associate with childbirth is psychological in origin. The modern American girl is physically in excellent condition to have a baby. But if she has been taught to fear childbirth, her tension may actually cause pain. Natural childbirth, on the other hand, attempts to allay such fears and to relax the mother. However, there is no obligation to consider natural childbirth as the only way of having a baby. Your Catholic doctors use the same drugs administered in any approved hospital. In the minutes before the child is born, there will be pain. Perhaps you will recall the beautiful words from the Gospels. Our Lord saying, "A woman about to give birth has sorrow, because her hour has come. But when she has brought forth a child, she no longer remembers the anguish for her joy that a man is born into the world. When the baby's head appears, the doctor gently helps it out of the passage, and then he eases out the shoulders and then the torso, and the infant takes its first breath, or is helped to do so by a spank from the doctor. Now the doctor cuts the umbilical cord by which the baby has been attached to the placenta, and soon after the placenta also moves down through the birth canal. The delivery is complete, and you are that most privileged of humans, a mother. Until this century, breastfeeding was virtually the only way the average mother could supply nourishment to the newborn child. With the development of artificial formulas, however, it became fashionable to substitute bottle feeding. Mothers were told that it was more scientific, that it enabled hospitals and doctors to operate more efficiently. But German researchers made an interesting study which proved that the child thrives better under breastfeeding. The breastfed babies had quieter nerves and obviously were more relaxed and better adjusted. In addition to the psychological value that comes to the child from feeding in his mother's arms and at her breast, there are physical advantages. Doctors find that breastfed babies often gain weight faster, suffer fewer digestive upsets, and often have fewer allergies than those given synthetic formulas. A mother benefits from feeding her baby too. Nature has intended that mothers nurse their children, and a mother's bodily function may be thrown out of gear when this function is bypassed. Soon after your child returns from the hospital, you should begin immediately to prepare for his baptism, when the child must be given a Christian name. 10 to 15% of all marriages in this country are barren. The partners are unable to have children, and an additional 6 or 7% have succeeded in procreating one child but cannot give birth to more. Now medical experts estimate that more than 1/3 of all hitherto childless couples can achieve parenthood. Not long ago, it was generally believed that responsibility for the couple's infertility rested solely upon the wife. It is now thought that in 2 cases out of 5, the cause of sterility lies in the male. Any one of a dozen reasons could explain a woman's inability to conceive. For example, she may not be producing the ovum. Perhaps the egg is deposited normally but is defective and will not survive even when fertilized by the male sperm. A thyroid deficiency may be preventing fertilization or may cause immediate miscarriage. There may be lack of hormones necessary to develop the newly fertilized embryo, and so on. Conception, on the other hand, may also be hindered by a defect in the male. The measure of male fertility is the amount of sperm which the male ejects, as well as his general health. It is believed that unless an ejaculation contains 50 million sperm, the chances of any one reaching the egg are very slight. Therefore, the quantity and the quality of a man's sperm are determined by such factors as his general physical condition and the length of time that has lapsed since the last marital act, by his illnesses, fatigue, worry, or emotional upsets. Sometimes conception can be achieved by removing unfavorable conditions that relate to the marital act itself. For example, Dr. Bernard Bazzani comments that intercourse should take place on the potentially fertile days. In other cases, intercourse may be too frequent. The act also should be performed naturally and in a cheerfully relaxed mood, as free from tension as possible. How long should a couple wait before asking a doctor to help them conceive? A couple would be wise to seek the help if pregnancy does not occur within 18 months after marriage. The older the partners, of course, the more important it is that treatment be undertaken early, for the ability to reproduce decreases with age. Those who delay too long may lose their opportunity for parenthood. Where can you obtain medical treatment for infertility? Any modern doctor is probably sufficiently familiar with up-to-date techniques to perform a basic examination. Someone may suggest to you, however, the use of artificial insemination. The position of the Church on artificial insemination is unequivocal. speaking to the Fourth International Convention of Catholic Physicians in 1949, Pope Pius XII said, "Artificial insemination is something which must not just be regarded with extreme reserve, but must be utterly rejected." Even though childless, the world has not ended for the couple. They may well discover that God has a fulfillment of another kind in store for them. For one thing, they have full opportunity to cement their love for each other and to create a bond that in itself is very satisfying. For another thing, they can channel their parental instincts in other directions. Their freedom enables them to do more for others in the church and in the community than ordinary parents could ever do. Unfortunately, not all marriages are lived out happily. Somewhere along the line, selfishness, stubbornness, or false pride enter the picture, and a union which might have led to mutual sanctification becomes a source of bitter unhappiness, shame, and remorse. Even though they may not end in divorce, Catholic marriages can and do fail. They can reach a state where the husband deserts his wife and children, where husband and wife no longer live under the same roof, or where husband and wife may remain together, but in a state of permanent animosity. And even though there is always hope for reconciliation, such marriages are in desperate trouble. In addition to money problems, in-law problems, and the tendency to drink to excess, which will be discussed later, sources of friction which should be eliminated now in your marriage, lest they grow to endanger your union, include, among other things, the inability to agree on little things. What lies behind your inability, anyone's inability, to reach friendly conclusions about little things? Generally, I would say it is a sign that something deeper and more basic is gnawing at one or the other of you. For instance, such continual warfare often occurs when husband and wife are struggling to dominate the marriage. Or it may happen that a husband and wife now find themselves quarreling more often than they ever did before. If so, they should stop and think of the basic causes which may be involved. Of all the complaints which husbands make, the one that their wives nag them to death is probably most common. When a husband makes such a statement, he may be revealing a fundamental fact about himself, that he fails to give his wife the understanding and appreciation she needs, or that he is unsure of her love or his love for her. She wants to reach out and to hold him, and the easiest way is to call his attention to her as often as possible. It may be also that one or both partners neglect their religious duties. Research by social scientists unanimously confirms the fact that religious couples have a greater chance to achieve happiness than those without a true belief in God. All the evidence available adds up to the fact that a religious background is an asset to any marriage. It may be that a husband and wife quarrel over religion. This kind of quarrel occurs more commonly in mixed marriage, but it may also occur between those practicing Catholics who are married to members of the faith who are fallen away. But the fact remains that unless the causes of these conflicts can be resolved somehow, the very fabric of the marriage is threatened. A marriage is in danger when a husband and wife find it more difficult to talk to each other. Psychologists term this a breakdown in communication. It is an indication that at least one of the partners no longer has the same interest that formerly existed in the other's problems, feelings, and opinions. There is no longer a full sense of oneness in that marriage. It may also happen that one or both mates become increasingly careless of personal appearance. Every young man and woman naturally tries to make a good impression upon his prospective mate. The engaged probably go to extremes of personal adornment to attract each other. After the ceremony, some letdown is inevitable. Rare is the marriage that retains all the charm and glamour of the honeymoon. But both husband and wife in marriage should always maintain high standards of personal hygiene and dress with taste and dignity. A wife may become a careless and indifferent housekeeper. The wife who suddenly becomes careless may be reflecting a what's-the-use attitude about her obligation. A deep problem may be disturbing her, perhaps the feeling that her husband no longer appreciates her. Sometimes sex relations grow less satisfactory to one or both of the partners. The marital act is primarily an expression of mutual love and consideration. In the normal marriage, the satisfaction of both partners from physical communion should increase with growing understanding and with increased love. Unless there is an underlying physical reason, such as illness, fatigue, or worry, a diminishing enjoyment from the conjugal relationship indicates that serious strains and tensions exist elsewhere in this marriage. When conflicts over money appear, they are almost always the outward expression of deeper tension or friction that can be traced to the selfishness of one or both of the spouses. Signs of danger also exist when husband and wife want to stay away from home frequently, or they want to do it, whether consciously or not, just to escape from each other. This intense desire to seek the bulk of one's recreation away from one's partner has been termed psychological desertion. Or a husband or wife becomes unduly attentive to a member of the opposite sex. A married man or woman can be pleasant to members of the opposite sex, but so-called harmless flirtations should be viewed with reserve. A man or woman who demonstrates overly active interest in the other sex obviously is searching for some satisfaction which is not being obtained in his marriage. Perhaps there's a lack of excitement, a need for glamour, or a desire to feel attractive which one's mate has not satisfied. Or the man or woman may be emotionally immature and incapable of living up to the obligations of marriage. In any event, so-called innocent flirtations, if unchecked, may produce a deadly result. They may lead straight to adultery. Here for your consideration now are 5 other danger signs in marriage. One mate resents the other's attention to the children. One of the partners becomes noticeably indifferent to displays of affection. Husband or wife gambles to excess. Husband or wife fears that the other holds him back. Or one partner feels bored or ill at ease in the presence of the other. Some unions seem to wither from pure boredom when a husband or wife fails to make life interesting. Now, in dealing with these problems, it is important to understand how you best handle the danger symptoms. It should be emphasized again that insomuch as no marriage is perfect, you may detect indications of danger symptoms in your own union. Where these symptoms are not a major cause of tension, they should not be a source of worry. But you should try to remove any defects which a survey of your own marriage might reveal. Once you recognize the trouble areas, try to learn what conditions cause them. Ask God to help you see the real factors clearly. In analyzing them, try to understand your partner's feelings and his motivations or her needs. You may discover that you are primarily at fault. Maybe your partner's attitude towards you stems from your behavior, or maybe you have at least contributed to the situation in question. Few problems in marriage are the fault of one partner entirely. Once you believe that you clearly understand the problem, then talk it over with your mate. Resolve not to become angry, regardless of the turns the discussion takes. Select an occasion when you have enough time to discuss the problem leisurely. Try to view the problem constructively, in terms of what you can do in the future to make conditions better, rather than rehashing old incidents which may have led up to the problem. You will gain nothing and may lose much if you attribute to your mate an unwillingness to solve the problem or accuse him of obstinacy because he fails to see things your way. Try to reach an understanding, if only a partial one on a small point. If you can conclude your discussion feeling that something has been gained from it, the door will be open then for future talks and more progress later. What if these approaches fail, and the danger symptoms grow to constitute a real threat to your married happiness? You probably then should obtain outside guidance. By consulting your pastor or an experienced marriage counselor, you can usually obtain a helpful perspective. Often, a husband or wife is blind to the basic factors in marriage which an observant, experienced outsider can detect easily. If possible, both husband and wife should visit the counselor together.